This field is a little nicer, let's say. Let's say you do get to take a break and you do get to go get a cup of water, because a lot of fields don't offer water, this one does. You have to walk a mile to go get it, and sometimes you even have to pay for it. It's not like going to the drinking fountain here. You have to pay to get that drink of water. Sometimes you've been working all morning just to pay for your first drink of water. When you get it, it's out of the same dirty cup everybody on the field shares. But you're thankful for it. You really want it. You go back to work for a little while longer, and then it's time to go to school. All of this has happened even before you come to school. When you get there, you don't have time to go home and change. Maybe you don't even have other clothes that you can change into. So you go to work with dirty knees, with dirty hands. A lot of times you've been wearing the same thing all week. It's all you can afford. So when you get there, the other kids make fun of you for being dirty and smelling bad. It's not your fault. It's the only thing that you can do. When you get there, you have to really think hard and switch your mind over, because when you're here, you can't speak the language you speak at home with your family. If you do, not only will the people around you make fun of you, your teachers might get really mad at you. You might get a ruler across your knuckles if you speak the language you speak at home, even if you forget, even if you just slip into it really, really easily. You get in fights at school. Sometimes you try not to. Sometimes you start it because people are making fun of you, because they're making fun of your little brothers or sisters. So school's not a very fun place, but you don't have to worry about it because you're not going to be at the school for very long. Once the season changes, the crops change, and your family migrates to the next crop. That means you're only going to go to school maybe 3 or 4 months out of the year. And most of you probably won't go to school longer than 8th grade, so forget about college. Forget about a job that will pay really well. You're not going to get that opportunity. When you're done with school, you're right back out in the fields. You pick and pick and pick and pick and pick and pick and pick until the sun goes down. You go home to probably a 1-bedroom shack, maybe a tent, maybe the back of a car. And that's where you're going to start your day tomorrow. Same thing, you'll go to bed hungry, you'll wake up hungry. This is how the cycle goes. And that's the story of the Causa. Those are the conditions that most farm workers live in. Now, in the 1960s, even a little bit before that in the 50s, there was a man named Cesar Chavez. You guys heard a little bit about Chavez, I heard. Cesar Chavez was a farm worker too. He got an 8th grade level education, he could read and write, and he knew that was more than a lot of his community had, so he wanted to put that to good use. And he also had a passion for his people, for his community, and he wanted to improve conditions. So he and some other people who felt the same way, some of them were farm workers, some of them were not, but they felt like the way farm workers were living was not the way people should live if they're in the United States, joined forces. So together they created an organization where farm workers could come together, where they could feel like they were important, like they had a voice. So a lot of these kids, especially ones who were kids and grew up in a system like that, were taught they were only around to work. The best they could do was survive. Cesar and the farm workers wanted them to thrive, wanted them to have a good shot at equal rights, at working conditions that weren't going to break their backs, that weren't going to take their lives at 49 years old. That's the average life expectancy of a farm worker. So this organization was called the National Farm Workers Association. They did a number of things. One way to look at it is they started a union. Union represented the workers. It talked to the growers. It talked to the people who own the fields on behalf of the workers collectively. Now, in this case, this union was very important for this group because, like I said, many voices, you yourself were taught that what you had to say, who you were, didn't matter very much. But when there was an entire group that could speak for you, that you felt did care about you, did care about your rights, then it was a lot easier for you to ask for them yourself. So that's what that did. Farm work is an all people's thing. This movement, the National Farm Workers Movement, did inspire the Chicano movement, which kind of enlivened a cultural pride in one's heritage if you were Latino in America, if you were Hispanic. So that's one aspect, because a lot of farm workers come from an Hispanic culture. But farm work, all people have done it. During the Depression, everybody had the option of becoming a farm worker, and many, many people did. Has anybody ever read any John Steinbeck books? I know that might be your, Of Mice and Men. You guys have heard of Mice and Men? The guy who wrote that book wrote another book called Grapes of Wrath. Has anybody read that book? Grapes of Wrath is about a white migrant farm working family. It's during the Depression. They have to pack up everything they own, and that's the only job available. It's very, very hard. It's a good book if you guys want to read it. That gives you a little bit wider idea of how many people are farm workers, how many people's rights were being exploited. So Cesar Chavez is the voice that came out of that started advocating for people. We're going to meet Cesar during the story. We're also going to meet a few other characters that are real from history, some that aren't. While we're watching, one thing I want you guys to keep in mind, Cesar Chavez, one of the most remarkable things about him is he, like his contemporary, Dr. Martin Luther King, was nonviolent. He insisted on leading a nonviolent movement. While you guys are watching, I want you to think of why that was so important. Think about what the alternative would have been. Nonviolence is a word that kind of sounds nice. You know, it sounds like everybody's holding hands, everybody's friends. Sure, that could be a part of it. But in this case, nonviolent meant you would not use violence even if somebody just ran over your brother with a car. Even if somebody is pointing a gun at you or spraying you with poison, you do not fight back. That's the level of nonviolence that this movement required. Think about why people were willing to do that. Think about how it was effective. Maybe think for a second, if they had been violent, what would have happened to the movement? When you're leading a nonviolent movement, you have to be creative. Since you can't use force to get what you want, you have to use tactic. You have to use strategy. So watch for the strategies that are used during this movement, what people did to make sure that their point got across, to make sure they accomplished their goal without hurting anybody. And we can go ahead and start the show. And finally, think about what it would take for any of you to give up some of the things that Marta does. Be sure to turn to page 7. There's an article I wrote by Marta Hernandez. May not be the front headline, but it's a start. My father never would have believed this. His daughter, writing for a real American newspaper. By the time he was my age, he'd already spent his life in the fields.
Mi vida es en el campo.
My grandparents came to Texas from Mexico just in time for Papa to be born an American citizen. They opened up a little grocery and they lived in the back.
Life in Texas was pretty good until the Great Depression.
My family lost everything. That's when they came to California.
We had no choice.
After owning their own business, it wasn't easy for my grandparents.